Hello, hi everyone, and good morning, and welcome back to the class of pastoral research or the academic research within a pastoral context or Christian context. So, we've been discussing what the research is, what the academic research is, and how that academic research would apply to the students of Christian studies and also for those who are leaders in a pastoral or ministry setting. And I told you the human existence itself, it demands research or constant search of answers because of the nature of the reality that we are in, which is not perfect, which is still incomplete, which is broken. So having issues with the reality that we are in, it is inevitable, meaning it is necessary, absolutely necessary for us to examine and study and question and try to find the answers and solutions to those issues and needs. Thus, it is within our human nature and human existence, it is necessary for us to do the search and research. And also, as a student and as a minister, as a leader, you are facing these problems and issues, and especially within this kind of academic context that we are in. If you're in a school, high school, college, and it is required for us to the research. I mean, basically, the education that we are doing is done by doing research or study. While study is usually it has the nuance or the connotation of being passive in learning, the research is a more active way of approaching the subject of that then subject matters or the questions or issues or problems. So that's where we are. So we kind of identified why do we need the research and what the research is, and we continue that trying to apply that to the pastoral setting or ministry context. Thus, we are coming to the week number 9. This is 9th week. Okay, so 9th week that we are doing this study. Let me write down for your reference. Week number 9. And we have discussed a little bit of this last week, and we'll continue. Research and pastoral strategy. Because the pastoral context that we are in is, again, it's a reality. And that reality is labeled as In very narrow sense, pastoral strategy, pastoral context means a church. But for us, this is also pastoral. We're not just doing the education as they define it in a secular context, but this education is part of pastoral context. Because the reason that the school, this kind of school, the Christian school, so-called Christian college and university is existing is so we can raise the Christian leaders who can lead the Christian community and also influence the community outside the church. So that's in broader sense as a pastoral. So as you study, it is very pastoral, and this is part of that pastoral context. Knowing that any pastoral context, whether it's school like this or your church or any other like a Christian organization, non-profit organization, or even your home, your family, it does require certain strategy. Strategy is a way of doing things in a better way. So we just talked about the reality of ministry and talked about the minister last week and the congregation. The minister is a person who's doing the ministry. So as you do something, whether you're a minister or a businessman or doctor, lawyer, every profession today, these days, it does require certain strategy, because strategy has to do with the communication and decision making and working that out and so on. So you basically make your decisions, and leadership basically is strategy. It does require us to be strategic. When you say you are a leader, you're in position to take a responsibility. Those responsibilities that we talk about, the responsibility, whether it's big or small, any responsibility that you're given, and then you're given the authority with it. The reason people assert or give authority to a person or a group of people, the team of people, is because they want you to make decisions for everyone, so they can, these who are in a larger group, they want to be happy, they want to prosper, they want to learn, they want to be better, they want to be developed. So that's basically who the leaders are, whether there's a president of a nation or the pastor, leading pastor of a church. So any leadership, it does require a strategy. And the reason that we are saying the leadership is strategic is because any strategy, if we are to be a strategy, it does require research and study. You're not just making a decision randomly out of blue. You don't do that if you're a responsible leader. So our context, whether it's a church or a non-profit organization or a home whatever the situation, if it's a school, I mean, it's the same thing. A leader, Christian leader, who is doing the pastoral work, they need to have a good working strategy, and the ways or the way to get a good strategy, a good working strategy, is to investigate and to do the research and to study. So understanding the strategy context, they conclude this: any ministry setting or pastoral context, it does have strategic needs, which it also requires or demands a research. The next. Pastoring, we talked about this last week, so we'll go quick review. Pastoring is an art, it is also science, and it is like a business, it's an enterprise. So, going over the last week's lesson, the needs that we face is very complex, and it takes a decision making, and it's because we have limited resources, whether it's people or money or time or space or energy, whatever the case, we have limited resources, and limited resource does require a research. Does require a strategy, and to have a strategy, we do need to do the research. So deciding the priority, we talked about the priority, and it takes research to make a good, well-educated decision. And these are the agenda that the pastoral research needs to cover: the text, and the strategy, structure, and programs. Okay. The text here means, if it's a church, it's going to be your congregation, the leadership. These are the text. And then with that text, they are living in their own context. So the text for you as a pastor in a church is going to be your congregation. And if you're a Bible teacher or the teacher, Sunday school teacher in a church, that your text is going to be your students. So these are the texts. The strategy is a decision. It's how you're going to do whatever you are going to do. And it does take a certain structure. For example, a church may have at least 2 different structures in the sense or in the terms of a size. Larger group and then smaller group. Larger group usually is the congregation getting together on Sunday, every Sunday morning to worship. That's going to be a larger group, and it might be the whole families. Some churches, some American churches still have a service including the little ones, and so in those cases it's a larger group. And the smaller group will be like a Sunday schools by age or the gender. You divide them into smaller groups. So basically that will be the kind of structure that I'm talking about. Or may have a discipling structure or administering structure in a church. So that's going to be 2 different kind of structures. The discipling structure is like a Bible studies and prayer meetings, and these are like a discipling structure, or aiming at the nurturing of your congregation, while the committees and then general assembly these are going to be the administrative structures. They do make decisions. They do make decisions for doing the ministries. So they're like two basic structures in that sense. So these are going to be the structures, and every structures that requires also the strategies, and because of that the need of strategy, structures need to be researched and need to be studied. And the programs are very detailed of when and where and who's going to do and what and how it's going to do it, and then how you're going to finance that, and then what are the materials going to be used and so forth. So that's very detailed part of strategy. And leaders make those decisions, and leaders are ones who's going to carry out these programs. So we do have programs that requires us to be more research, because as you do the research, you execute the programs, and you come back and review the result of those research, and then you say whether this been good or bad, and why is it good and why is it not effective, and those are basically so-called research. So that's quite a practical, very practical, and a critical part of pastoral research in a church setting. So that being said, these are going to be the pastoral research agenda. You have people that you want to know. So getting to know the people and making the notice of it, and then making the implications and references and so on. That's very essential part of pastoral research. And when we say the research, usually you associate that with the books and readings and the informations you find on the internet and so on. So it's usually the letters, the writings, and the documents. But pastoral research, the major part in actual reality, the major part of your research is going to be focused on people, your congregation. And many pastors kind of forget that is the major core part of your ministry and your pastoral work. And many pastors these days, they focus on the studying studying for the sermons, because sermons somehow it became the major core priority of the ministry. Well, that happens as the church becomes bigger and larger, which they think is a church growth. Yeah, I've studied in Fuller Theological Seminary, where they began to preach, like McGavran, the Dr. McGavran. He is one of the leading advocate of church growth, and I've studied under his curriculum as well. So I'm very familiar with this church growth. And there was like a church growth movement in 90s and early until the 2010 or so. But the result of church growth, the number of each individual church becoming like a mega church, then you lose very critical part of this ministry, the people. Of course, if you have many good so-called lay leaders, they are doing some pastoral work, but they are not like a trained professionals in ministry. And usually the lead pastors, they focus on the preaching, while the rest of so-called nurturing and the pastoring is delegated to the other lay leaders. It has advantages and disadvantages. And as we kind of review those trends, the pastor needs to have close interpersonal, intimate contact and the communication with their congregation. I mean, his or her congregation. That's the way it should be. And without that, you don't have good results. The sermons only, it does not grow a person to be a more mature Christian. So that's one agenda that we need to put the priority on. Whether you're a pastor or just a teacher in a church, or even parents, Christian parents, as a Christian parents, your children, the person is the number one priority. Then the future. Leaders are the ones who are preparing for the future. You have to think of a year later, 5 years, and 10 years later on. And you would have certain expectations toward that future. Trying to, be responsible for the future. So responsibility here we have just discussed. You have to be responsible for the future, not only the future of your own, you're taking responsibility for the future of others. I mean, that's a big responsibility, because you may change someone's life. Actually, you are mandated to change the life of your sheep or your congregation. That's who the pastors are. That's who the Christian leaders are. And you are obligated to change their future for the good, toward the kingdom, toward the biblical standard, toward the so-called God's will. So how do you do that? You have to have a certain strategy, and to do so, you need to do some serious research on each people, so you can have a good, positive, biblical or Christian influence on them, so they can make their own decisions or projections toward their own future. So it does require very serious research to project future and to plan for it, and to carry out the acts and the programs and all these things to bring that future as reality. So not only reality comes to you, but you are trying to create a new and better reality. That's what it is. I mean, that's what the Christian life is about. And especially if you're a pastor of a church or the leader of a group, is being responsible for discipling a handful of students or disciples, then you need to do a very serious research. That's what the pastoral research is about. And to to be responsible for the people and the future, it is necessary for us, the leaders, to know the needs, what their needs are. When we talk about these needs, there are visible ones and there are invisible ones. There are hidden needs. And visible needs is easy to determine. If they are hungry, you can tell they are hungry. If they are sick, you can tell they are sick. But the pastors and the Christian leaders, we are called to find out the needs, the so-called spiritual needs. And these spiritual needs are not easily detectable. It's not easily visible. It's usually hidden. And how do you find that out? By doing the research of that person, that soul, that spirit. And then the trends. Actually, that's another word. Better word for trend would be history. The narrative. The narrative. There is a bigger narrative and the micro narrative. Bigger narrative is called the macro narrative. Macro narrative is what's going on in this world, what's going on in your country, what's going on in your society, what's going on in your church. That far would be macro. So you need to read the winds and the weather and the change of climate, meaning these are like a larger context. So there is a trend. You look at the past and you look to the present and look toward the future. So we talked about the future. So that's how you are going to read the signs of the time. So another word, history, would be the signs of the time. You have to be really, really sensitive about the signs of time. In your personal life, of course. But as a leader, as a pastor, you're not just being responsible for yourself, but you're being responsible for others as well. That's a big responsibility. And because of the nature of that big responsibility, that you should be taking the responsibility for not only your time but their time. So that's the trends is about, and it takes very serious consideration and asking questions and investigating the answers and trying to resolve the problems that comes with your narrative, your church's narrative, and the narrative of the world. So, we have a lot of things going on in this 2021, and some is inherited from last year. For example, coronavirus is still going on, and we know it's not going to end soon. So what does that have implication on our ministry, the history of the kingdom? So that's kind of the things that we are to be concerned with and trying to find answers. So that was the lesson 2. And we go to lesson 3, the biblical research. When you do the pastoral research, the document research, other than we just talked about this research that is needed to do the ministry, and it does more than the focusing on the books, but all the strategies that you need to apply to the resolving or the investigating of these issues that we talked about in the lesson 2 just a minute ago, it has to come out of the Bible. And I have given a whole class about how to do the Bible study or research, biblical research. So this is a very, very concentrated and shorter version of that. But still, you need to understand the text. When we say the text for us Christians, it means the Bible. The Bible is our text, and we can do anything without the Bible. So Bible is the foundation of anything that we do, and it does require us to study the text. It doesn't come up easily. I mean, some of the lessons are very obvious. How you should live your life as a Christian. That's simple and it is there. But it goes much beyond, deeper than the acts or behaviors or morals or ethics that are written as instructions or laws. So these laws and instructions, it says do's and don'ts. That's easier for us to understand than the principles that are behind it. And the studying of the text actually does with who God is, and what is the truth. These things are a little more complicated and complex issues than do's and don'ts. And thus, they do require certain level of research. And sometimes it does take some very intellectual approach. And not all human beings are given the same capacity of intellect. And some of us are given more intellectual ability than others, and we say that it's being smart. And I mean, being smart is a privilege, but at the same time, it is responsibility, and it is a gift, and you are to use that gift for the good of others. Okay, let's take a short break, and let me come back. Okay, let us continue with the discussion of text. The text. The text again is the Bible. And to understand the Bible, a pastor or any Christian leader, we need to discuss the hermeneutics, which is the very interpretation, another way of saying interpretation. The text, sometimes it does require interpretation. And it is an interpretation like I've said, it is an art, and at the same time it is a science. Because it is science, it does require the research. And the languages, as we know, the original Bible is written with the languages which usually is not our own. As in Aramaic, the Hebrew, and then Greek. And unless you're the Greek, I mean, even if you're a Greek, the Greek that's used in the Bible for the New Testament or the translation of the Old Testament into Greek, those are about 2,000, almost 2,000 years ago. So it's an old Greek, and thus you need some knowledge and skills on these languages. But fortunately for us, many already has done these studies for the last couple thousand years, and then we have good resources that we can rely on. So it's readily available in the internet, and on online websites we have all these language helps for the Bible. Doctrine, people have different doctrines even on the same topic. So we need to study the doctrines, and you need to do the research on doctrines, and you need to determine which is more proper sometimes, and more of your kind of doctrine. And so that's doctrine. And then secondary sources. As you study the Bible, not only you need the Bible, but you need the dictionaries, and then you need the concordance, and you need other background resources, and also you may use some commentaries. So these are some of the examples of the secondary resources. And in the research, when you do the research, there is always that primary resource, and then secondary resource, or third and fourth. Usually you just use up to secondary sources, and you have the text, which is the Bible, and you need some other books or the documents or resources that are helping to understand that text, and those are called the secondary resources. And in any academic research, there's a primary resource, then there's secondary resources, and you need to you should be able to distinguish these two. Okay. Then the preaching. Speech. Good preaching is a good speech. It does require good speech. And to be able to have good speech, first, it is a gift. It is a gift. And you are born with the ability for good delivery, good speech. So some may have better speech than others, but also you can be trained to be a good speaker. So that training. It does require the study and research, and you can improve up to a certain degree by doing the training. So that's where that is. And then good preaching and the research. I just said that. And research your sermons. As you prepare as a pastor or as a just Bible teacher, you are going to prepare a sermon or the study material for the day. And it does. You need to do some serious study on that. And for especially for a pastor, it is always like whether it's weekly or sometimes you have to do daily sermons, and that takes a lot of time. And people usually, the congregation, they come to church and listen to like a 20-30 minutes or sometimes 15 minutes of sermon, and then you think it is very easy. You think that the pastor is paid for just doing that 1 hour, most of 1 hour service for the Sundays. And that's not the case. Actually, we have to do, if you're doing like a 30-minute sermon, let's say, it takes at least 10 times of that amount of time to be put into to prepare 30 minutes. If it's an hour sermon or lecture, it takes at least 10 hours to prepare that. So it's not that easy as some may think. And large part of that preparation for the sermon, it involves a lot of reading and documentation, selecting and going through the books and so on. So sermon is a very final product of a serious research. And we are, as Christian leaders, if you're not pastor, that you're not going to do the sermon every Sundays, but even as a Bible teacher, you know that you are going to need to some serious study on the materials that you prepare, even for a preschool kids. You need to prepare a lot more than teaching the elementary kids, because it does take a certain preparation to be able to make them to have attention to, and it's a lot more difficult to communicate with the younger kids than the older ones. So that does require a lot of studies, right? And you may also do the research on other sermon and then skills and spirit. That's where you may have some dilemma as a pastor or the someone who prepares for the sermon and preaching. And I prefer the spirit than skills. Some have a good skills, and some of them become so famous because so their sermons so-called are good. So how do you determine a good sermon? I don't think Jesus' sermon was full of humors. As we read the Bible, Bible doesn't say that he had a lot of humors, but he had a lot of good examples. And what is a good sermon? Is that about the skills, or is that the spirit? Uh, you know, but I rather have more spirit than skills, even though it may not be so fun and interesting, but need to have that core, the message. That's how I see the preaching is. The teaching. Teaching is more important part of a ministry. For me, I believe teaching is more important than the preaching. And the pastor, if you're a pastor of a church, you need to be a good teacher before you become a good preacher. So I rather have a good teacher than a good preacher, because teaching is where you actually interact, have that communication with your people, your congregation. So that interaction, it brings that interpersonal relationship. It builds the interpersonal relationship. That's why teaching is more important. And then teaching is important and necessary because through that teaching you are developing and then educating your people, your students to study, to research. So it agrees with our subject. We want not only the pastors and leaders to be a researcher, but we want the students to become a good researcher themselves, because we want them to discover their own truth, and we want them to find out who God is, not just by us telling them who God is. Rather, we want them to discover who God is by themselves. That's my the main approach, and that I believe that is much better than telling them and help just letting them to listen and decide. They need to do investigation, they do need to do research, and they need to do their own study to come up with the conclusion, their own conclusion. So that's what I believe. And because of that, it is our job as a teacher, as a pastor, help them to do the research. But to be able to do that, you have to be a very studious person. You need to be a diligent researcher. And then you need to understand the material that you're teaching. I mean, that's very basic. And but the thing is, many teachers, when you come to a Sunday school, I see many teachers come not prepared. They do not know their materials. And if that's the case, the students cannot learn. You cannot intrigue your students to the material or the topic that you're going to study for that particular lesson. Not only you need to understand your material, but you need to understand your students. Like I said just before, our main subject of research is a person, as people. So, goes here again. Study your students. You got to know not only their names. Some teachers, they do not know the names of their students. Some pastors don't even know the names of his or her congregation, and that's sad. But you need to know more than that. I mean, if you don't know the names, and then you don't know nothing about that person. So you need to know the names and the families, and then family dynamics and the background, and then what their job is. That's all. These are all the subject of the study as a teacher and as a pastor. And then delivery. The sermons also, of course, I mean, good sermon, it requires a good delivery. It's an art of communication. It's more art than science, but still, you need to do some serious research to have a good delivery. Same thing with the teaching, especially when you're in a small group, like 5-6 students sitting with you doing a small group. It takes a very good amount of skills to be a good deliverer of information and then discussion. So not only you're delivering, but you're facilitating. So that's where teaching is. And teaching is being developed. Your teaching skill as a teacher is going to be developed as you continue to have experiences. And you need to make mistakes and errors, and then you need to correct them. So trial and error applies to your teaching. I mean, it applies to preaching as well, but especially in teaching, it does. And the way of study and research, one key element in research it is not trying to make mistakes, but you are trying to learn from your mistakes. That's what the research is about. And I just told you many times, do not be afraid to make mistakes. And you should allow your people and your students to make them mistakes. Sometimes it can be serious. And if you see this mistake's gonna be destructive, and you decide that it's gonna give more damage than the learning, then that's where you need to get to be involved. But you don't stop them. You cannot stop a person to do something, but you can give advice or warnings. And sometimes it happens even with the warnings, and that you cannot, play God in that. That's my philosophy of doing ministry. So how do you know? It comes with your experience. So you yourself need to make mistakes and then review on it. So that's very key part. Again, very key part of research is, making mistakes. But everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone learns from those mistakes. Nurturing. Nurturing is a key part of pastoral research. Many pastors and Christian teachers, disciple makers, they believe that disciple making or the nurturing, another word for nurturing is disciple making according to navigators. They like to use that term. But whether it's a disciple making or nurturing or something else, the spiritual formation is another word. And so whatever the language that you use, they think it's an art, but there's a very big part which requires a science. Again, the science is a result of a logical study, so-called research. So nurturing, it takes not only an artistic, it's a gift, artistic gift, but it does need very diligent study. You need to be educated yourself to be a good nurturer. So it's both art and science. It does take some creativity as well as diligent study. It takes a care. It is about the care. Nurturing is about the care. So it is not funny. It's not funny. It's a principle that as you do care for that particular person, his or her spirit and his or her soul and the state of being, then that person grows. More time you spend, more love you give, person matures and grows. That's very logical conclusion that I come up with in many years of this experience as a pastor. So the care, it does almost automatically mature a person. So that's something that you can give. And the second word, keyword for the nurturing as a study and science is customize. Meaning you cannot apply the same style or same method or same approach to every person that you are dealing with or that you're nurturing, because every single one of them are different. They're different. So you may have certain pattern of the disciples or the students. You may build a certain patterns, okay, and they come into this so-called As you have the experience of nurturing, and for example, I mainly done my ministry with the young people, college age, mainly, and I've had hundreds and hundreds of disciples that I did in the course of 30 years of my ministry. And if you are so focused to a given spectrum of people and then in the age, and then you are able to build certain kind of patterns or spectrums or the styles, so you know you know who you are dealing with. So that helps you to customize your strategy toward a certain group of people, certain style of people that you're dealing with. So that's kind of strategy, and it comes as a result of study and serious research. So research, a major part of research is accumulating the data and documenting it in a way so you can come up with a certain principle or patterns or the types, and that's part of it. So as that's, you know, I mean, and the nurturing is a science in terms that you should customize your discipling, your nurturing to the each different needs and style of the disciples that you're dealing with. Then the contents. How much contents do you have? And after like a 30 years of nurturing and doing the discipling and then pastoring, I do have tons and tons of contents. I've written so many sermons, and then have done so many teachings on various subjects and topics. I do have, contents that I can, teach or deliver in a given situation and get into the given topic and subjects. So developing and accumulating these contents, that takes time, and it does take a study and research. So pastoral research is about developing these contents. I mean, today, 21st century, contents are key value. I mean, it's a valuable. In the if you live in 18th century, you didn't have too much contents that you need to study or deal with. But today, there are tons and tons. I mean, enormous amount of contents, and but you need to have your own contents to teach and to preach, and that comes as a result of serious investigation and study. And then creativity, that's very artistic part of nurturing, and you have to be creative. It's not only as a gift, but also it takes some diligent work to develop your creativity, because everyone has different kind of creativity that is given by God. And continuity, Nurturing a person in a spiritual formation, it takes long time. It takes a certain amount of time. Not just a month or weeks, but usually years. So that means you have to excuse me. So the continuity and the consistency and the persistence is a key word to this kind of the study or research. And nurturing is not a week project, it's years, at least 2 or 3 years. It takes 2 or 3 years to nurture a person. And once you begin your nurturing, you should be responsible for that person for at least 2 or 3 years, as long as it's permissible. And sometimes, it's not possible, but whenever it is possible, you should. Documentation. Good researcher always document. You need to write down or take a picture, take a video, whatever the ways that are available or appropriate that you're going to use that means to document. And here are some of the examples of how you do the documentation for the research. As a pastor or teacher or even as a parent. Not many parents document in a way a researcher or scientist are doing. But if you could, I advise you to do that, just like a scientist. Memorandum is a short, very short note. You don't write a whole sentence. You just write down keywords, and then you later on develop into a notes. Notes are a little bigger than memorandum, and some of the good scientists and then developer and the inventors, they do always carry their notes. And good artists, the writers, the authors, they do carry handed notes always, and they make memos and then later write into notes and then develop into that into the writings. So I advise you to build that habit to become a good student and good researcher and good pastor and good leader. It is always important to make those notes, especially when you have those momentary ideas. You may think you can remember because it's such a good idea, and the cases are you forget most of those good ideas, and you will not be able to think it ever again. So just it can be like $1 million idea that you just lost because you did not make that notes. And make it just a habit And then developing a writing skill, that is very key to a good researcher. Even if you have a good research, then if you do not have that skills to report it in a way that it is readable to the general public, or those who are interested in the particular subject, and then you are only halfway through with your research. So developing a good writing skill and keep writing, because you cannot develop writing skills unless you keep writing. So that's a very key to a good researcher. And then you have to have a certain system of categorizing and then storing your writings. It became a lot much easier for us to systemize these documentation because of the computers. Before the computers, you have to have all these folders and way of making that kind of library system of your own. But these days, you can have folders and subfolders, and you can just rearrange those folders whenever you want, and whatever the way you want it, even later on, and with just one click. And so system is much more easier for these days. So it is critical for you to be able to have this system of documentation. So that's I think that's pretty much what we have time for today, and we'll continue this lesson next week, which is our last week on this class. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.